Hello and welcome to the Power of Integrity podcast, where leadership aligns with principles. Today we have, and we're very fortunate to have Jay Golden, a world-class storytelling coach, author, speaker, a delightful man at that as well. We're going to have a wonderful conversation with Jay Golden. I'd love for you to kind of tell us about your journey, what it's about, what got you here, and where we're going from here with this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's an honor, Ralph. Thank you. It's good to see you again. Uh, you know, my journey into this world began in one particular moment. Began as I was holding my baby daughter, my brand new baby daughter. She was 5 days old, and the economy was teetering. The year was 2009. And as one does in such moments, I paused and reflected on my own journey. And I had been doing viral video at the time that was traveling around. People would send these messages through these videos and animations. We had just come through a project where we had $1 million budget for a video series, hiring Pixar people and the greatest innovators in video at the time. And I was sitting there holding my baby daughter, and I felt like I had left something very important by the side of the road. I felt like this topic that you discuss so frequently, this power of integrity, to me is about wholeness. That's the essence of integrity that comes from the word integritas, which is a Latin word, and it's about how we show up in a way that's whole. And I did not feel whole. It was exciting, and yet I had left something very important. And what I had left by the side of the road came from my days as a traveler. When in my early 20s, when I had traveled the world and explored different countries in South America and Asia, in Europe, and studied languages. And that was my passion. And what I had come up with at that time was that power of connectivity, that traveler's commerce of essential stories, of the stories that we share with one another about our true learnings in our lives. That is so much what you do when you're on the road. And although the media and the technology had advanced in the years I had been in that territory since 1995 in the Bay Area, there was something really missing. And that thing that was really missing that I discovered in that quiet moment was the power of the shared human story. And I realized that was truly what I cared about, what I believed in while we were creating this media. And even today, it's even so much more so. We were creating this media that people were passing around from person to person because they couldn't quite describe what they wanted to say. And so the media and the videos did that job for them. And yet, my true belief is that every person, especially from a leadership perspective, every person carries their own deep and important stories that deliver on their authenticity and their purpose and their truest beliefs. And I felt like that was untended. I really felt like it wasn't recognized, that we were focusing so much on the media that we weren't focusing on the person. And so I left behind that path of technology and media creation and movie making, and I went analog. And that was 15 years ago. Basically, I've been doing it ever since, focusing on the art of the retellable story in leadership, connecting people to people through shared purpose.
Fascinating, fascinating. And you coach to that today with your clientele. I know we have a common ally and friend in Charles Antis, one of our previous guests on this show from Antis Roofing, just a big philanthropist and a wonderful gentleman here and a leader in Orange County business. And you've helped cultivate and curate much of that story that he tells today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it became the most prevalent application became coaching. Once I turned all of the storytelling that I had been developing in the decade before that into that human leadership story, it became natural that coaching was the profession, which was funny because, my dad was a college basketball coach. And I don't take that word lightly at all. In fact, I didn't adopt it at first, but people started calling me coach. And so I finally relented. The kind of coach that I am is not the guy with the whistle on the sideline. It's more the person that supports the inner spirit and the inner power and the wholeness that I truly see in these leaders around Orange County and around the world that is untapped. And it's that, that when we talk about integrity, it's that disconnection between what you truly believe, who you truly are inside, and how you communicate out in the world. And a lot of people use, they lean on information and explanation and their own personal charisma and power without creating that, delivering on that integrity. And so, yeah, it took a long time. I grew up in Irvine, but I had left there many years before. And then I was introduced to Charles. And it was, of course, Charles he's a powerful individual. But at the time when we met years ago, he wasn't nearly as clear in his communication as he is now, and he'll tell you that. I wouldn't say it otherwise. But the power of story being the ability to deliver on a transformational journey and a journey of change that you've experienced and be able to really create a movie in your mind that you share with your audience over and over again in different forms. That became an art that he really adopted. And many people today will say, oh, yes, the moldy mattress, his famous story about how he began to deliver on purpose and how he realized that it was his role not only to help people to stay safe and dry, but also to share willingly and to give in fearlessly. And that became so much a part of his legacy. And so I'm really honored to have collaborated with Charles over all these years.
Yes, yes, and that story he had a chance to tell to our audience when he was a guest on the podcast. And Jay, interestingly, when you talk about the root of integrity and wholeness, what always comes to mind, and I hear it woven in between the lines here, is being authentic and can be putting yourself on the line. And to be authentic even requires that sense of vulnerability sometimes. Would you expand a little bit on that?
Thank you. It's a powerful topic. The idea that authentic comes from the Greek word authentikos, which means genuine. And so, how to be genuine as a leader, as a CEO, is tricky, right? Because there's all these filters that we've grown up with, whether you come from a strategy background or you're a founder and you built something out of your own heart and soul. There's still these hurdles between us and the audience that sometimes ends up looking kind of square, kind of staid. And to be authentic is to really share what you believe, what you wake up with in the morning, what you believe is possible. And it's not just saying it. That's the thing. It's you can say it over and over again what you believe. You can put it up on the wall and you can have people repeat it over and over again, but it doesn't mean that it's going to sink in. If you want people to feel the power of that purpose through your authentic nature and authentic communication, it really requires that you deliver it in 1,000 different ways. And to deliver it in 1,000 different ways means finding that transformational journey where people feel what you feel and they see what you see, and you do it every day in a new way.
Yes. Yeah, you've helped inspire the thinking, because at first I was wandering down the notion about how we form these images of what leadership is, and maybe it's that stoic, firm, resolved individual who's not vulnerable, But then to be authentic and vulnerable and yet still resolved and riveted to purpose is where I think that dichotomy, seeming dichotomy, actually merges together to become a oneness and a more wholeness in how we operate.
I love that. And coming back to that vulnerability topic, I just want to say vulnerability is such a it's kind of gotten a lot of attention, right? People say, well, you got to get vulnerable. And I have to say, Ralph, I have a slightly different take on this. It's on the one hand, I totally agree. And yet it's not just about being vulnerable, right? Because being vulnerable with your people, with your family, with your friends, when you have a moment where it's difficult, um, when you're in the journey, you gotta be real. But when you're on stage or when you're on a podcast or an interview, um, being vulnerable is an act of containment. So you get real and come into a place of depth, what I call it's built on the Joseph Campbell's innermost cave, coming into this place of not knowing. To me, that is the most vulnerable place in the story. When you've depicted a journey and you get to a moment where you don't know what's next, when you feel like you're lost. Like to me, that moment holding my daughter Sophia in those first few days where I realized, oh my gosh, I had been building for 12 years this whole path to be the guy, to be the media storyteller, and that wasn't really my path. And to realize that and to feel that vulnerability, but to come through it. And in your stories, there's times when you're vulnerable and you got to work that with your friends, your therapist or your family, or work it with yourself and be present with that. It's a little bit different than when you're being vulnerable on stage and you've come through something and you're depicting a shift, and that orients you into that until finally moment of the story, which is where the power begins. It's like every single story, all stories begin with winter into spring. At the core of every single story is winter into spring. It's the not knowing place, that place of roots down, vulnerability, I'm not sure, and that possibility of that first sprout, that springtime. That's the core of every transformation of every story.
Fantastic. You're already coaching our audience on storytelling.
That's the fun.
That's the fun part. Well, I can see you love it, and I can see how it is authentic and it fits you like the skin you're in. It's a delight
Thank
having a
you.
conversation with you, Jay.
Thank you.
So
It's a great topic.
yeah, and normally I conform to a more regimented process in this conversation, but I feel like maybe asking you a wide open question about what would you like to say next?
Well, I just like our conversation. I like your questions. This territory of vulnerability, this territory of integrity. Uh, I feel like so I've done a little study of your podcast. I just want to say I love that you are pursuing this. You are taking what is clearly almost devotional practice, something you really believe in, and also something that you're dedicated to studying, and you're going out and gathering gems of wisdom from these amazing humans. And I just really respect that. I think it's a great project and a great example of how you take what you care about, which is related but also tangential to your business practice, and you bring it out to the world. So I think it's a great example of modeling what you do in the world. And it's funny because speaking about integrity, I'm imagining that you experience this. So much of my work is all integrity. Like you can't do the work of story seeking, story listening, story shaping, gathering people's trust, these true innovative leaders that are out in the world. You can't hold their trust without integrity. And part of the challenge that I find is you got to live it. If you're not living it and you're teaching it, then there's a big disconnect. If you're not living it every day, and for me, it's discovering my own stories and my own purpose every day. because I can't speak about purpose without owning it. And I got to tell you, you probably know this, but that is not an easy path. It's easier to just go out and talk about things, but to have to own it and be real and question yourself every day. Am I living this? Am I questioning? Am I being guided by my own authentic purpose? Am I asking questions and being willing to leave things behind in order to pursue a path that's true and right? And I have to tell you, it's not just for leaders, of course, it's for entire organizations. Some of the things that you talk about, the idea of how do you support authenticity and purpose and integrity and integrity in an organization. It's all the same thing, which is how do you bring your own gifts as a leader, but also truly do the most foundational part of storytelling, which is story listening. Really hearing what your customers, what your team members, what their journeys are, what their transformational journeys are, what their hopes and dreams are, and what's standing in the way in terms of your work. That's what adds up to a greater story. That's the power of this time, really, because in my work in Orange County, I am so overjoyed to now worked with about 20 CEOs of nonprofits and for-profit organizations, and every single day I get to talk to people that are being so real and so committed in their visions, and they're bringing it every single day on the big stage, on the little stage, through their conversations. And story, honestly, story is the vehicle. Story is not really the center. The center is more what you're talking about. It's more about being whole and being real with what you believe in, what you dream about, and walking it every day.
Yes. Yeah, it was coming to mind. Are we talking our talk or are we walking our walk? And you just referenced right there. An old Chinese proverb says, to know and not to do is not yet to know. And we
Yeah,
have to do,
love it.
right? Yeah, we've got to do it every day up front, one at a time. Now, for me, the vaccination took about 20 something years ago, where it got real clear when I learned from a life coach that everything in life is self responsibly created. And I thought, well, geez, what does that mean? And that's discussion for another time to get into depth. But here, for purposes,
Mm.
I know that as I conduct myself, so also shall I reap whatever it is that comes into my life. And so, what is it do I want in my life? And I would like to be authentic. I would like those around me to be authentic. And I would like integrity to prevail and be pervasive in every interaction. And so, for that to happen, if I generate my reality, then I better be real in this topic. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I have to tell you about one exciting discovery that I've made in the last couple of years. Partially we talked about Charles earlier, and I worked with Charles for a few years, and after some time, and he was out telling his stories, and people were saying, "Well, what is this? How is this happening?" And then he ended up bringing together a group of people that were interested in doing that work too, and we started doing what we call kind of purpose pods. We started Orange County CEO groups, and it was really great working bringing out story in a group of transformational leaders where they would begin to not only workshop their stories that they would share in different ways, but they started helping each other. And because in this territory of sharing story, other things happen when you do it day after day. And to the point that after our pod ended, after we had worked together for there's like 6 or 9 months, the CEO said, we need to stay together. We need to keep meeting. And so that formed a breakfast club. And that breakfast club became a group which I was so impressed by because they supported each other. They ended up sitting on each other's boards, fundraising for each other. And more than that, the level of trust and authenticity that was cultivated in part from this getting real, getting vulnerable, sharing stories, and sharing who we are, but as a kind of practice field to go out and stand on the bigger stage is something that to this very day I look at as transformational. And honestly, that how we share our stories together and listen together as leaders to me is every bit as significant as the work you do on your own, studying your own journey and considering how better to communicate out in the world.
Yeah, it's powerful, powerful insight and wisdom. For those folks listening who have a business mind and business orientation, maybe you can share an example how applying integrity in your life has benefited your business. Is there any one or two things that come to mind specifically?
I love this question. There was a moment, it was early on. I had just written my book, Retellable, and things were kind of taking off for me, but it was still a tenuous moment. And I was introduced to one CEO who was very influential. He had a global company that he had started 30 years before, and it was in the travel space. And it was clear it was going to be an amazing opportunity. But he told me a story, his own origin about how he started the business, and it was a tough moment, I have to admit, because in those early conversations before you really start a project, it's tricky because you're cultivating trust in a kind of rapid form. And obviously in my work, I have to really tend people. My job is to know my clients and their lives. And so I have to walk carefully and yet clearly as I learn about these people. And so the story that he told me, I really had a hard time with. And it was right before we were starting the project, and I kind of slept on it. And I realized I was at this key moment where I had to be so straight with this person. I had no choice that I had to be very straight with him because that's just how it goes, and you can't start without being completely honest and authentic. And so I was concerned because I realized that I might have to give up this whole project, which could have very significant implications. And so I talked to him that next day after he told me the story, and we were about to start the project. And he said, "What'd you think about my story?" And I remember this moment. I was standing in my backyard in our garden. We had these goldenberry bushes growing all around us. They look like tomatillo plants. These little green.
Mhm.
It's a super fruit, which I one of my favorite plants. But we had them growing all over our garden, and I was standing in this garden, and I remember this moment because it was a kind of fork in the road. And I said, "It sounds like you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth." And that was how the story sounded. It's He really liked the story, but it didn't validate the power and purpose that he had brought. It sounded like he just kind of received something and was acting on it, and it didn't feel like it carried the power. Now, I only tell you this story because he ended up loving this story. He ended up telling it in media interviews and to friends because it was for him an example of someone being real. And it's hard as a CEO. I'm sure you've seen this and experienced this. It's hard getting real counsel because the people that give you counsel are oftentimes dependent on you for their salaries. It's a very tricky balance.
Yeah,
And
very definitely.
so we ended up working together for 4 years, and it ended up, honestly, it was $1 million conversation. And I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that I had to be real and that I had to share it as best as I can because you just can't do it otherwise. And of course, that's only one story of many stories that a person needs to share as a leader: your origin, your impacts, your vision stories, the stories of your collaborators, the stories of your most recent insights and your innovations, and how you share those in a way that drops down into that kind of winter, into that place of not knowing, leveraging brain science, leveraging that dopamine, that cortisol, that oxytocin in order to truly impact memorability and effectiveness, not just when you're in a conversation and people are saying, oh, yes, that sounds great, but seriously driving them to action and influence long after you've left the room. And in order to do that, it's a delicate walk. You have to be real. You have to be, as a collaborator, you have to listen deeply and connect the dots. But for me, it's never about what I say. It's never about what I think. It's always about how to support the connecting of the dots for that leader in a way that feels real. And so that moment to me sticks out as a moment where I put it all on the table. I said, I can walk away from this right now because we have to be real about your story.
Yeah, you remind me, nothing wrong with being a silver spoon child. That just happens to be, how it came out. But the difference between someone who's privileged and someone who's entitled is the entitled is sitting on third base thinking they hit a triple.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. If that's not clear, I completely agree. What a great gift to receive such privilege. But you don't stand on that as your origin story.
Right.
Like, if you're talking about trying to inspire people into connectivity, human connection, transformation, and activating a world, you have to find some other depth. That might be where you come from, but it's a separate point.
Very separate point. Yes. And
Yeah.
privilege acknowledges that with respect and deference, and understands that others did not have that same good fortune, that was happenstance in their lives.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I don't if you won't see on my website requirement that you are uh you made everything yourself. That is a separate point. What is required, however, is that you show up to life willing to learn, willing to be real, and willing to inspire. The word leader comes from the Old English ledere, which means conduit. It's about being a conduit to change, a conduit to influence, and a conduit to transformation. It's not being the person who knows and has known ever since you were born.
yes. Yeah. And the essence of privilege, when you have it and you honor it, you become a good steward. It's almost like you got to chapter 2 without really having to go through chapter 1 that many of us had to be self-made. You were
Well,
made,
there's
but that doesn't mean you forfeit the making that continues on with your good stewardship and being a good shepherd to others and yourself, and the things that you've been fortunate enough to be given. What do you do with those?
I love this. Now we're going to break into the topic of privilege. I think it's we're gifted with so much to be alive, to have made it through, to be able to have gone to school, to be able to have been fed. There's so many forms of the privilege that we've received. And like you're saying, it's how do you what do you do with it? And to me, I have to say, so much of the work that I'm doing nowadays is about life listening. It's about story listening. Purpose is not just something that you received when you were 10 years old or 20 years old or 30 years old or last week. Purpose is an ongoing iteration and act of intention that's informed by the signposts of your life and your leadership. Purpose comes from the old French proposer. It's about intent, what you propose. And you propose that every single day. And so the act of life listening, of story listening, is the act of creating these insights and these recent relevant moments on a daily basis not because you know exactly what these things are that happened yesterday and what the meaning is, but because when it comes time to stand up in front of your team, in stand up in front of your investors, your board of directors, stand up in front of a wide audience of people that are waiting for your very words, it's that in that 15 minutes of prep or that 15 hours of prep, you have a flow of content that you can match to relevant messages that inform how you're talking about this, what you believe today, and where you believe it's time to go. And so to have both these small and recent insights along with your big and core insights, that's the winning combination. And it's one that keeps you fresh and involved, active, and listening.
Perfect. So, Jay, one of the things that our audience has told us they really like hearing is almost the opposite side of integrity, is where the examples that some of our guests have given where integrity broke down. Generally, the counterparty lacked something in that integrated perspective and didn't come with full integrity and authenticity. Is there a time in your business or personal life where you can remember a stark example of where it broke down and what the consequences were?
It's a powerful question. I think in part because it's a difficult question. In the year 2020, I had been on. I've been traveling the world. My book was out. I was coaching leaders around the world, and I was doing a lot of keynote speaking in international and national settings. And things after COVID, things really fell to the ground. It was a rough time because obviously the big stage had come down. Every CEO I had been working with was just trying to hold their life and their business and their teams together. And my own speaking had gone to zero. And so it was a tricky moment, and everybody had their different experience there. But what I started doing is I started creating groups through Zoom, bringing these CEOs together to share their insights and translate them together through collaboration into story, a little bit like I described before in the Orange County group. Um, and so I was doing this with some people I had worked with already, that some transformational leaders. And there was one circumstance where I had brought in somebody and they agreed to be a part of it. And this was with all of some of my best allies, best friend CEOs that were working on their craft, and this woman was among them. And I have to tell you, like, I kept writing and saying, okay, we're in the group now. I'm still waiting for your payment. And uh and she kind of just ignored me. And then we kept on, you can imagine the kind of conversations that we're having in collaborations when we're talking about transformational stories of our time is an incredible high level of trust and collaboration. And this went on for some time, and basically she ghosted me, like ignored payment. And I was giving all this leeway, and even today it feels really hard to say. It's one thing if you're having a hard time. Believe me, I've been there in so many different iterations to just say I can't do it, or I need to wait, or but to ignore the topic entirely, and even to the point where I had to write back and say, I so appreciate you, I appreciate the work that we've done, but I can't communicate with you anymore if you're going to ignore this conversation. It's a part of integrity because this is how I'm also feeding my family. And can we have a conversation about it? Nothing. I got zero. And I had to say, I wish you well. This is the end of our relationship. And it's so heart-wrenching to me to even say that. It's never happened before. And I still do wish her well. It's a beautiful person, but there was a true disconnect that was going on that was much bigger than what was happening with me. And haven't spoken since.
Yes, yeah, things. Well, it's a stark example of things collapsing under their own weight when one party lacks integrity.
Yeah, yeah. And the irony is that the work that this certain individual is doing is so much about presenting integrity out into the world. And so I just, humble bow and keep walking, and put it as a reminder to elevate communications, and be okay with difficult situations and how you speak about them, even if they're messy.
Even if they're messy. Yes. Well, we've been with Jay Golden, author of Retellable, world class storyteller. Jay, one of the things we've got some folks that are younger in our audience, and maybe you can give them some of your thoughts wide open about how they apply integrity in their world, personally and professionally. What suggestions would you have for those younger folks starting out?
I'm recovering from that story. It feels so. All right,
The
let's start.
residue, the
Uh,
remnants still live on.
Man, it just gives me sadness. Um, what I am witnessing out in the world is, as we have a changing economy, as we have an advancing act of artificial intelligence taking over certain roles and responsibilities in industries of things that people have trained for many years, I find that the thing that cannot be taken away from you is your purpose. What cannot be duplicated is your true, original, authentic gift in this world. And to find this is to listen over and over again for those insights that appear to you on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, and to begin to formulate a greater story of who you are and where you're headed, and to tend it like a candle, to tend it like a garden, to continue to come back to that and say, how can I bring my own wholeness to this world? Not the I'm supposed to do that work in the world solely, but why I'm supposed to do that work in the world. And that to me is so much about integrity. Integrity, again, being about wholeness. How am I whole in the world? It's about how do you listen for what your true gifts are and how do you tend them. That may happen on the side, of course. It may happen while you're doing whatever work you're doing, but to be able to listen and recognize and cultivate your truest gifts, and to be able to tell these transformations through the little stories in our lives, that's what I recommend. And I recommend that you start as early as you can, because those gifts are truly yours. They're truly original, and they're calling to you and asking for you to be tended. Now, that might sound completely aspirational, but if you look at any one of those powerful leaders that we've worked with in Orange County, Eric Goodman, who you had on this program, who just yesterday won this National Philanthropy Award, Charles Antis, Don Reese, or Julie Hudash, or David Blair, all of these beautiful people, Ed Hart, Deborah Wondercheck, all these amazing people, they are listening to their lives. They are listening to what life is asking of them, and they're doing it every single day. So that to me is about how to be authentic and how to be whole in your integrity.
Yes, and you're echoing a little bit of Simon Sinek's knowing your why and your purpose very clearly. You know, it was Russell Bertrand who said people seek less your information than they do your confidence and conviction in something. And when you know your why and your purpose and your passion, you have conviction, and people follow that and honor that for sure. Well, Jay,
I'm gonna before I go, since you brought up Simon, I want to bring up one of my favorite Simon Sinek pieces, which is what he says is that split happens. Split happens. What that means is the thing that you were the best at, the thing that you always could go to as your go to thing, whether that's a skill or a superpower or capacity, a passion or a path, all of the sudden stops working. split happens. And you notice it and you're saying, why is that not working? This is the thing that I could always go to. What do you do when split happens? Split happens is the time to listen for what you left by the side of the road, because we gather these insights and these lessons, but we leave them by the side of the road because we don't know what to do with them. We don't know where they fit. And that's fine. That's an understandable strategy for navigating life. However, those moments, those experiences, those skills and passions are still waiting for us back by the side of the road. We can go back, travel back in time, build that scene again, look at that moment, and consider, what does it mean not to the me then? What does it mean to the me now? And what power is left that I can bring to come into my integrity or my wholeness going into this new time?
Wow. Wow. I'm left speechless. That was
Yeah.
wonderfully said. Our group, young and old, and middle, all across the spectrums, for sure, have taken away a lot of pearls and gems today. Jay, can you tell our audience, if they want to get in touch with you, how they best get in touch with you? What's the best and easiest way?
Thank you. Yeah. The easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Love telling stories there and connecting and featuring great stories. You can send me an email at jay@retellable.com. Retellable is my company. It's also my book. You can look on Amazon for the Retellable book. But reach out, share insights, stories, challenges. I help individual leaders, and I also do a lot of speaking and training and collaborative storytelling for organizations. And it's the most fun thing I could possibly imagine. And I really appreciate this time together, Ralph.
Well, it's a wonderful conversation. I'm really glad we had this time together. Jay Golden, world class storytelling coach, the author of Retellable. Thank you, Jay, for joining us and our audience. We've been blessed for the time and honored to have you.
Thank you, Ralph. You've got the power.
The information presented in this program is provided for informational purposes only. The information is believed to be reliable, but no guarantee of accuracy is made or implied. Expressions of opinions are as of this date and are subject to change without notice. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult a legal or tax professional for specific information regarding your individual situation. This information does not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of capital. Ralph Adamo is registered with the securities and are offered through Kovac Securities, Inc., member FINRA. SIPC 6451 North Federal Highway, Suite 1201, Fort Lauderdale, Florida 33308. Telephone number 954-782-4771. Investment advisory services are offered through Kovac Advisors, Inc. Integrity Wealth Management is not affiliated with Kovac Securities, Inc. or Kovac Advisors, Inc.